Welcome to Scouting for Growth, the podcast where we explore breakthrough ideas, emerging trends, and innovative strategies to shape the future of tomorrow in business. In today's episode, we have the pleasure of hosting Anneli Scopazzi, CEO and founder of Boulevard Recruiting, I would say in French, Boulevard Recruiting, with a background rooted in fast growth startup environments. Anneli has become an authority on matching world-class talent to the right opportunities, particularly in an era brimming with AI-driven disruption. If you want to make it within the Silicon Valley crowd of top players, you must talk to Anneli, who has built a portfolio of VC-backed startups and scale-ups that she helps scale through high-impact talent acquisition strategies. So today, expect a compelling conversation about how technology is changing the face of recruiting, the critical importance of upskilling and reskilling in today's competitive market, and what early-stage ventures need to keep in mind while scaling with emerging technology, including AI. Whether you are a founder aiming to grow your team, an HR leader navigating talent acquisition in tech, or simply curious about where the industry is headed, this discussion is sure to provide valuable insight to help you stay ahead of the change curve. So get ready. This episode is an inside look into the new frontier of talent management. We'll consider upskilling and reskilling, and we'll find ways to manifest that really unique opportunity for you to really start understanding why talent is so important for your business. Anneli, thank you for being with us today. Welcome to the Scouting for Growth podcast. Hi, Anneli. Thank you so much for joining me on Scouting for Growth today.
Yeah, it's so nice to be here. Thank you for the invitation.
Such a pleasure. Well, I read your bio and I gathered you work for some of the big unicorns and some of the big players out there. So my first question to you, Anneli, is, how did you get started? What got you to work for the like of Palantir and Figma and then build today's business?
Well, I actually started my career out of college in accounting kind of randomly, and I had a journey there for about 5 years. At that point, I did identify as an entrepreneur. I figured that I would start my own CPA firm someday. And I actually started a dance studio in high school and a nonprofit in my 20s. So I've always thought that I would land in owning my own company someday. When I moved from Los Angeles back to the Bay Area, which is home, I decided to take that opportunity and make a change. I felt like I wasn't feeling very fulfilled in accounting. There's a lot of things that I like about it, but I much more prefer to be more people interfacing. Mm-hmm. So I took a risk and I took a 100% commission job at a recruiting firm in San Francisco that supported a lot of these tech companies, including Palantir. So Palantir was one of my first clients, and they recruited me in to work there, which was really exciting. I had a really good journey at Palantir. I was promoted very quickly to oversee all recruiting for the business teams. And then I left for Figma, actually very sadly, because Palantir was a very good home for me. But I really felt like I wanted to grow more and do more engineering product design recruiting or classic product engineering teams. And so I felt with Figma what was nice, the opportunity to grow in that area and also continue to lead as their head of talent growing a team. So that was a really cool experience. I scaled Figma through this Series B and C from 38 to 150 employees. And I very much identify as a startup person more than a scale-up person, if you've heard those two terms. And so I feel that Figma was scaling so rapidly beyond my capacity. I had never seen anything like that when they scaled from 150 to 1,000 really quickly. And so I left, honestly, in a burnout. I was feeling very overwhelmed. I could not enjoy my vacations. I was really struggling. And so I left to start my own company, which was always the dream. And I felt by that point, I had enough experience finally to do so. And it enabled me to continue to work with these early startups where I really thrive, where our first client was Notion. Very fortunately, Notion has done very well. And we scaled Notion from 20 to 65 employees with their team. So ever since then, we've been working with startups for the last 5.5 years and worked with over 100 at this point.
Yeah, congratulations. So tell us, why Boulevard Recruiting? Tell us maybe the background around the name and what do you do every day?
Um,
Your ethos would be really helpful to understand.
Oh man, I love that question about the name. So Boulevard, I intentionally did not want to name after myself. I think that a lot of agencies do that, and I wanted it to be something more distinct and separate from me that had its own brand. And the initial brainstorm, I have 5 siblings, and my 2 parents are constantly chatting in Facebook Messenger. We were brainstorming on what the name could be. One of the early brainstorms was around French words specifically. I love the French language. I love Paris. I've been in love with it since I was very young. And so we were looking at a lot of French words. What I really liked about Boulevard was that it's technically of French origin, though it's very recognizable around the world and very much English word in its own right. And I also really liked that Boulevard represented working from home because I lived on Gary Boulevard in San Francisco at the time. And it also represented working remotely, particularly in New York and Paris being my 2 favorite cities. So that's the story behind the name. And then just in terms of what I'm doing, we work with early stage startups. It's shifted a little bit as the market has changed. It used to be that our sweet spot was Series B, and then it actually moved down to seed stage when the market crashed. And now we're currently sitting pretty sweetly in the Series A is where we start to work with our clients and hopefully scale with them for the next couple of years is the goal, to be the first recruiters on the ground, working very closely with founders. And then as the companies scale and they hire their internal recruiters, working very closely also with them.
Yeah, love the name, being French, Boulevard, bien sûr.
Yes.
Very
Oh,
nice.
wow. You're
Very
way better
nice.
at French than I am, by the way. My French sucks.
Everybody, as you said, recognize the term. A big street, Avenue Matignon in Paris, is seen as, at the end of, it's a big boulevard as well. And so for me, when I can actually see the name, I also can see a lot of people walking and passing through and enjoying what is beautiful to see there. So I understand you actually focusing on startup and scale ups. And, a lot of the work we do include both. Actually, we help big corporates to learn to work with startups, not always easy in finance because they prefer the scale ups who have, a set proposition. But at the same time, when you start looking at the solutions, sometimes the startups have those solutions because they've seen a problem and they have been trying to really refine their proposition and their product to focus and solve that single issue. So what is it for you when you start working with those organizations and as opposed to large established companies, what excites you about them?
I think it's a number of things. So I'm trying to distill it down to the number one thing. I think that it's the ability to do more than you're qualified to do. Joining as head of talent at Figma, at that point in time, I didn't have my core product design engineering experience, which is very important in the long term in Silicon Valley. And they were willing to give me a chance to come in and figure it out. And I think that's very classic in any search that we work on, where the ideal candidate is XYZ, but usually it ends up being XY and probably not Z or some combination of those things. And so for me, as someone that just really loves to learn fast, I think that it really gives you an opportunity to stretch yourself very fast. I will say that there is a downside that it can be very painful when that's your growth path. So for example, it is a very short period of time that I had a recruiting manager with a lot of experience. When I was at Palantir, a lot of the time my manager was an engineer. And then when I was at Figma, my manager was the COO and then the CEO. And now at Boulevard, I don't have a manager. So a lot of my personal growth is very self-taught. And I think that has been very liberating and rewarding, but also can be very painful at times, learning through mistakes.
Yeah, no, I can relate to that. I mean, I love learning and I'm a continuous learner, but yes, when you're on the top, you have to actually have this diligence in some ways to remember that you are scaling, the market is moving, so you need to adapt. And at the same time, you have to look at new things. When you look at, for example, what is happening with artificial intelligence, we have to relearn to actually use technology We have to relearn to do things in a much more efficient and productive way. How has your role evolved then over the years, thinking about current shifts, right, with technology and remote work culture? Has it been a problem with your clients? Do you need to meet them face to face, or actually remote works very well for what you do every day?
I'm kind of weirdly, this actually sounds terrible. I need to find the right words, but COVID benefited us in a very big way because we, as a remote company, founded in Q4 2019, just before COVID, I was so fiercely committed to working remotely. That was the number one driver for starting my company. It's why the name Boulevard represents remote work. It's very important to me. And so the first couple clients that we took on were really just trying to negotiate more face time in the office. And it was really going against what I was trying to accomplish with my life. And so when COVID happened, it was just this surreal thing of, oh, wow, everybody needs to figure out how to work remotely. So it has hugely benefited us because now companies are very accustomed to doing so and they understand how it works. And hopefully they have the quality controls in place to feel comfortable executing at that level remotely. And so what's been nice is that since the first few months in our company, nobody has challenged us being 100% remote, and that's really enabled us to scale, I think, more comfortably than otherwise. Just
Mhm.
for context, we're 20-something recruiters today. And in terms of I wouldn't say, I think that it's something that felt very scary for a minute back when ChatGPT was first released, and there was all of this appearance of fast acceleration of artificial intelligence. But working in tech, we knew this has been ongoing for years. They've been building these things for years. It just felt for a minute very threatening. I think that I felt very responsible to go look at all of the different tools and all the different offerings and really understand and make sure that we were the first to adopt, particularly working with these early tech companies. You don't want to be the company that doesn't survive what could be a massive extinction if companies don't figure it out. I will say that the recruiting landscape, I haven't seen really amazing AI solutions just yet. I think there are some things that make us more efficient. I definitely think we're in a bit of a safe space, knock on wood, in terms of being very relationship focused, which is very hard to replicate with an AI technology. But I would say the more exciting thing is just we're working with so many AI companies. We're seeing them getting funded massively. In January alone, probably a dozen different AI companies I chatted with about working with them and just talking to them about the recent funding. And it's definitely an exciting space to be in.
Yeah. So let's go into this AI impact on talent acquisition, actually, from your perspective. How is AI therefore reshaping the way companies identify and recruit top talent? Has it changed, or actually it provides new opportunities to actually shape the roles of tomorrow?
I think that right now, what we are all embracing and excited about is there's a lot of administrative work to be excellent in recruiting. And the sort of volume that we process, whether this be the amount of inbound applications, which has surged dramatically in the last couple of years globally, and also the amount of profiles that we need to review to find the very specific ones when we're headhunting, it can feel like a major grind. I would say when I was a recruiter, that was my least favorite part of the job. And so I think that all of the recruiting tools we're seeing are starting to incorporate some of these technologies in terms of sorting through profiles much faster and narrowing it down to a shorter list for the human to review. And I find that to be very exciting. I think that there could be more work, and what I would love to see is automated scheduling, for example. I have a Claire Labs scheduling robot. It's half automated, but still requires a human's review when it doesn't have a very specific prompt. So it's not pure AI, actually.
Mhm.
And then I also see there are some automations to help schedule one-on-one calls, but for recruiting, often have 5 meetings back to back, and that can actually get quite complex looking at executives' calendars and asking them to move it. So I would love to see more advancement in that front. But in terms of just the rest of the recruiting job and taking phone calls and talking with candidates about their expectations and dreams, I just don't see that being outsourced.
So, is it fair to say that despite all this merging technology and tools, and which allows you to do your job better, there are not yet, you see, within the recruitment space, some standards and best practices you would recommend others to use?
I would say definitely take advantage of the tools that allow you to sift through volume a lot faster. anyone in recruiting knows that when you're going through, let's call it 800 applications, which is what my recruiter was doing the other day. And we narrowed it down, and there were only 3 in there that were actually qualified against the job description. The AI technology, as it develops to be really accurate, I'm not sure I can confidently say that any of them are today. I think it's yet to be seen. But to narrow down the volume and say, hey, please reject this candidate if it doesn't include these very minimum requirements that would make someone interesting to this company. I think we have to be careful that the AI doesn't accidentally reject somebody else, maybe outside the box that we would want to consider. And I think that's the risk and why we still need to have some sort of manual review at the end.
Yeah, no, I can understand that. I mean, in the industry I serve, which is, finance, insurance, we are a very relationship-based industry. And so when we look at artificial intelligence, it's a means to augment and automate tasks, but, that lens around having that human part of the process, partly because of regulations. And, the standard of work we need to a bit to, and I think customers, users want to make sure that there is some transparency and some guardrails in the way the industry makes decisions. So like in your space, it's, I would say, comme ci, comme ça. Personalization is still very, very important. What are some of the critical skills, though, you see from skills gap viewpoint you have observed when you look at the candidates? And how does business try to alleviate those when you start looking at the fact that AI can force us to look at upskilling and reskilling ourselves? Sure, you are playing with tools. I play with tools all the time to actually see how it can improve my work, but we all have to start embracing AI. And so how do you evaluate, that skill gap, potentially the talent, and do you make recommendation around upskilling and reskilling strategies?
I think it's important to understand your role with the AI. The AI can only do so well as the prompt that you give it. So if you're working with a conversational AI tool like ChatGPT or Gemini and you're trying to draft some content, maybe this is a job description or a campaign to send to a lot of candidates, I found that it can be much more powerful if you add more specific guidance. So say, hey, I'm going to copy paste a statement from the CEO so you can pick up on what is their tone. They really prefer to be very casual. They really prefer to be very whatever this might be. This is an example from last week, by the way, of working on a campaign. And so I think the AI is only as good as you direct it to be and to spend more and not be lazy. Don't just give a generic prompt, but be more specific in your prompts as you're working with the AI. For this reason, I am still very reluctant to use AI to draft anything personally for me. I don't think it's digested enough data to really understand my personality and my communication preferences. I would love to see a tool where I could get it to that place, and I think it will be there someday. But I think that it's understanding that there are still limitations with this technology, and just having AI in your back pocket isn't going to make everyone excellent today. I think that in terms of upskilling, it's one, just understanding what are the latest tool stack in your industry. So this is going to really vary. We recruit for engineers, we recruit for salespeople, we recruit for recruiters, and these are all very different skill sets. And so I think for recruiters, just understanding the latest technologies in our field and at least knowing what to ramp up on if they haven't used this tool in the past. And you can, be self-taught or try online courses or things like that if you're interviewing for a role that has a requirement like that. I've seen in some interview processes, say with engineers, where instead of just trying to prevent them from using AI, they might actually embrace it. But the bar is just a little bit higher. If you're using an AI tool, you got to be a little bit faster and know how to use that. So there's that. But then I think at the end of the day, it's really about understanding what is your difference from AI. And that really has to do more with relationship skills. And so I would say it's a little less about trying to compete with AI itself, which I don't think we will ever be able to do. But it's more just really finding how you differentiate yourselves and what strengths you bring in more of like the softer personal world.
Yeah. So let's go into soft skills. When I, talk to early stage ventures, partly the one who want to go to the United States, they are always lost in some ways, either from an accounting or legal perspective, or finding the right person to help them build the right team. How do you work with startups and scale ups? And do you actually work with international people wanting to come to the US as well? Tell us a little bit more on your process, the type of people you meet, maybe some of the case studies, the success stories you have experienced in recent months.
So our model for context is an embedded model. We don't charge a commission. And traditionally, when you have a commission-based company, you're going to have a centralized database of candidates with all these warm relationships that you track over the years and really understand what motivates them. And then you are able to share this candidate with a number of clients. Our model, in contrast, is our model is more time-based. It's not a direct hourly rate, but there is some component of time where we have a monthly flat fee based on the number of roles that we're working on. We work embedded with these clients. So we have email addresses with their companies. We work in their tools. If they don't have tools yet as an early startup, we will set up their first tools. And then we're also connected in Slack, communicating ongoing throughout every day with our clients. So the searches that we take on can vary pretty widely, given that we're not incentivized to develop this really this dense database of candidates with similarities. Rather, we will do whatever search the client asks us to do. While the big demand is for engineering, I would say a win recently was we filled a head of real estate role, which was just very random and not something most early startups hired for, or a general manager in a specific region. We're seeing that request come up a little bit more often. But in terms of the global hiring, we've had a few clients that are 100% remote, where they will hire around the world. It's not necessarily about bringing international people to the US, though. It's more just working remotely with a US company. So I can think of two right now that have that as a strategy. And then we also do have one client out in Paris where we recruit for them across Europe. But I wouldn't say that we see a lot of people coming to the US, for example. And our wins are going to be typically more about hiring and how many cool hires do we make for these startups.
That's cool. Yes, you're right. If you are doing remote, you can work all around the globe and stay, wherever you are. And the beauty of this is then you actually can play with the time zone. Do you see when you start working remote and, my team also, I believe in the same ethos as you. I believe you can build amazing capability. We build Venture Labs and you can do it digitally. So I promote, digital venture labs where I can work remotely with clients. So therefore, I can actually maintain my sustainability criteria as well, which are really strong here in Europe. Some of the companies we work with are actually, we're affecting their scope 3 in some ways, right? If you take a plane as a partner. So they love being able to do extremely good work, highly, sophisticated labs, but then being able to do probably 90% of it digitally, remotely. And then, we do go for once or twice a year, only once or twice a year to meet together. So my question to you is, how do you actually either convince young ventures that remote is the way to go? So that's the first part of the question. And second, how do you make sure that people who are going to work remotely are motivated to work remotely?
And this is a big question because I'm a business owner. So of course I worry about this for my own team, or at least I did. The first comment I would make is I don't know if I really have to convince any companies that remote is the way to go. When we work with them, they've already committed to one way or the other, whether that's remote or in office or hybrid, being both. And I have seen a little bit of an uptick in companies working in the office compared to obviously COVID, but in recent years. But there's still very much a trend in startups that they prefer working remotely as the default. And I think that's just a budgetary reason when you consider how expensive it is to have real estate. And so especially when you're early and you just don't have a ton of funding, they find it as an economical way to operate. We have seen people who we find later had 2 jobs and lied about it. And they're trying to pull off having 2 employers and working full time with both. That happened one time here, actually. It was devastating to learn. And so there is a question of how do you monitor that this person is giving what they committed to do. I think in most jobs within recruiting, it can be pretty obvious. We've systematized a lot of our work in terms of sending weekly reports to every client for every search that tells them, here are all the active candidates that we brought into the pipeline. Here's the number of calls we made last week. Here's the number we have calendared. Here's the activity, the volume of sourcing. And then once a month, we have a full report that shows the total numbers, the total outreach, all the interviews, et cetera. And it's pretty quick to see whether or not the volume and the work that needs to be done is happening. In the case that I was not able to detect it, this was an operations person. It was much harder to measure their job. And I think that if we had more of those sorts of roles, I'd probably put more thought into what are those KPIs that I expect to see on a week over week basis to ensure that they are doing what they've committed to do.
Yeah, no, super interesting because at the end of the day, it's about outcomes. So outcomes, OKRs, and KPIs become really a great way to measure outcomes rather than outputs and to make sure that actually somebody is aligned to the organization goals and objectives. When you look at recruiting, what do you think, looking at your industry as a whole, what do you think needs to change for it to be much better for candidates, for the companies you are working with?
One of the hardest things, and I hate saying this about my community, but relative to the population of recruiters, I've seen that there are not many excellent ones. And you really want there to be. I was working with a client and he told me, Anneli, you're the best recruiter I've ever worked with. And I asked him why. And he said, well, you do the things that you say you're going to do. I can trust you to do it after I've tasked you something. You circle back and confirm it was done. And to me, that feels like such a low bar, like I wish there had been something more to it and that wasn't the average experience. I feel sometimes what happens is that because this is a relatively social job and it is very relationships based, a lot of people are drawn to the profession for that part of it, but have a really hard time sustaining the grunt work, the hard work that goes behind getting to that moment of having an offer where you need to be carving out a lot of time to go through profiles and to look at profiles to email and cold outreach. You have to do very deep work on your engagement strategy and making sure your content is just really above average and stand out when you're going to email tons of engineers that everybody else is going after and moving very quickly. And you have to have organization in order to be juggling, say, dozens of candidates at any one time and making sure that all are being updated and responded to very promptly. And so I think that what needs to change, if I could have my way in a magic wand, was just that maybe people really understood what it took to be great and were trained that way from the very get-go, and they maybe took more seriously the organizational aspect and the administrative aspect of the job and maybe opted out if that's not what they were up for and they really just wanted to have a relationships job.
Yeah, no, that's interesting as well because at the end of the day, you have a customer, you need to build a relationship and you need to actually create trust, right? Through transparency. And what you are saying is through the transparency you have created, you have built the trust and people are seeing things that they are not used to seeing from others they have worked with. So when you start looking for startups, who are trying to scale, what are the most important factors they should be considering within their talent strategy, right? What do you think is missing? What could be the top tip you could give them to actually look at talent in a way to build and scale their business?
This answer is very obvious to me. For me, it's founders need to understand that recruiting, early stage company recruiting, requires a lot of their time. And the best startups that I've worked with that have become very successful, if you were to ask those CEOs and founders how much of their time was spent on recruiting, I'm fairly sure they would say at least 50% of their time.
Wow.
And oftentimes what happens is we have founders come to us and they say, oh, we're going to hire Boulevard and then I don't have to worry about recruiting. And then they just kind of disappear. And I've found myself to be much more aggressive in my early calls and say, no, this is what I'm going to need from you. I'm going to need you to review our calibration profiles to make sure that we're in sync from the beginning. I want you to take a look at this campaign language because you've thought so deeply about your company and presented to boards. You're going to have language that's compelling. I want that to be in this content. We're going to need to have standing weekly syncs and talk about every candidates and how you really felt about it. I'm going to need your time for all these phone screens to actually talk to the candidates because a lot of CEOs, if they come from later stage companies, especially, they're very used to everybody else taking care of everything up until the final stage. But in startups, it's very hard to recruit Candidates can feel very uneasy. And it really benefits from the founders personally spending time in selling, but also just sharing all of their feedback so that we can calibrate to what they want very quickly.
Yeah. How do you recommend balancing, resource allocation? Like you've mentioned, actually, they need to spend 50% of their time, looking at those candidates and really understanding talent is a core of their business. And then, looking at maybe more specialized activity.
So I do want to clarify that this is very specific to a VC-backed startup, which is nearly every client that we have.
Okay.
But me, for example, as a startup, I'm bootstrapped. I absolutely have to be profitable. I don't have millions in the bank to fuel this growth that may or may not pan out. And therefore, I hire very slowly. And I'm kind of stabilized at 20-something employees today. I would like to grow a little bit more, but this isn't the case where I'm trying to get from 20 to 100 very quickly. And this is where it starts to be. You have to see recruiting as the thing that is going to leverage you to not do it in the future. Like you have to find people to delegate to in order to scale into your proper CEO role. And the way that you convince people to come join your company, which probably doesn't yet have any kind of reputation on average, you really need to lean into that and consider it as an investment in your time is worth finding great people that you can then feel comfortable delegating to and scaling out of that position. So it's one specific to VC backed and it's specific to early stage companies. The hope, of course, is that they scale out of it. And we saw that at Figma, where the CEO was doing most of the recruiting, then the VP engineering was doing most of the recruiting, and then I came on and I offloaded him from a lot of the recruiting. He was still very involved. But over time, I'm sure he's not spending most of his time on recruiting today as the CTO of a couple thousand employee company at this point. Did that answer your question? I think there was a part two.
It's super interesting. And so when you look at the companies you're working with, are they mostly located in the United States or you mentioned Paris, or actually they are all around the globe?
Mostly US based and very remote. I would say that our client base maps very closely to VC funding in the US, being San Francisco is the most highly concentrated, then New York, then Denver, Los Angeles, Austin, Seattle, those other cities.
Yeah, that's cool. So when you look at the top three overarching lessons, looking at your career, right? Palantir, Figma, you build Boulevard Recruiting. What would be the overarching lessons you would like the founders to remember, VC-backed founders to remember when they look at building talent and maybe equipping the HR leaders to build a business of the future in an era where emerging technology is affecting us all, and we need to move faster, better, identify the right talent to scale and grow our businesses?
The first one is just repeating, spend time on it. That's absolutely the first thing that's going to break the thing. If the person who is the biggest stakeholder isn't spending time on it, it's not going to work very well. The second aspect would be, I think, to really focus on hiring at a very high bar early, because what I have seen is that builds momentum and velocity. It's very hard to hire at the level of Palantir Figma, particularly when you're early and don't have much of a brand recognition yet. So those first hires can be very painful, actually. But what you see over time is if you can up-level the average talent in your company, it becomes easier to recruit more talented people as the company scales over time. And in the reverse, sometimes startups can get a little bit desperate and they just really need help and they really need to produce something. And so they might lower the bar. There is a balance to this, though. There is only so long. You can't wait forever to hire your first engineer, or your first recruiter, or whoever it might be. There has to be a little bit of a bet that you're willing to take. So I think the third lesson would be understand that an interview process is not 100% perfect, and you have to have a commitment if it doesn't work out to exit the person.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what's going to enable you to, in the moments where you can't find the perfect person, you can make a bet, you can take a risk, you can see how it goes. And if it doesn't work, you can always exit.
Yeah, great advice. And not leaving it too late, right, Anneli? So, Anneli, thank you so much for joining me today on the Scouting for Growth podcast. If people want to know about you and your VC-backed companies and maybe work with you, what should they do?
Connect with me on LinkedIn. That's the number one platform that I'm active on for sure. And so that's Anneli Scopazzi. You can put my name in the podcast.
Anneli Scopazzi, Italian name.
Yeah.
Thank you so
Yes, my
much.
husband's name, to be clear. I'm actually very Finnish.
Well, lovely name. Thank you so much for joining me today on the Scouting for Growth podcast.
Yes, I had so much fun. Thank you so much.
I hope you enjoyed this episode of Scouting for Growth. Please subscribe, share with friends, and leave a 5-star rating. Your rating is so valuable. I review all of them, and my team help me adapt content to meet your needs. Also, connect with me on my preferred channels. I am a B2B growth expert, so you will find me on LinkedIn, Instagram, and Threads, and X as well as Blue Sky. All information available below. Until next, keep scouting for growth.